This is our first time learning about arts and society in Puerto Rico. The students are very excited. This will be our first, for many of us, our first trip there. And we have some fluent Spanish speakers in the group, some beginners like myself, some intermediate speakers. So we're absolutely thrilled to join you all. So I'll hand over to you, Javier, and maybe you can all introduce yourselves. That would be great.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Welcome all. I have the honor of being the the Dean of the School of Arts, Design and Creative Industries here at Sagrado. We also have a couple of groups here. What are the name of the courses, please? Fundamentals of Drawing and History of Art, and some journalism students, and History of Puerto Rican Art. Great. So you also have a couple of groups here. I'm really happy to have the opportunity of sharing some ideas and some context above all. I was trying to, when we realized the idea of doing this, I started trying to find out a way of connecting all the important moments of arts in general in Puerto Rico. And because the last few years has been very heavy in terms of emergencies, crises, I realized that resistance was one key word that has been along the last few years. But also I realized that that's been for longer than the last 5 years, which is what everyone knows mostly. And that's when I decided to frame the presentation in terms of the role of arts and culture in terms of political resistance, economic and cultural resistance. And I'm going to go very, 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 very far back. I have to say that the only thing that you have to be aware is that usually when I make presentation in English, because I'm translating all the time in my mind, I will invent words that doesn't exist. So I have people in front of me. So if I don't find a word in English, I would ask all of you so you can help me. If not, I will invent words. So feel free to try to interpret what I'm trying to say, or just raise your hand and ask what did I mean. So let me see why this is not changing. Second, please. So I will have the presentation all the time because I will share a lot of images that can help me share the ideas that I want to share. Again, the School of Arts, Design and Creative Industries. And as I mentioned, the most important thing I want to do is to share some context. So especially from the friends from Pratt, when they come here, they can understand a little bit of the landscape and the role of arts, especially in terms of cultural resistance, as I will describe it. And I'm going to go very, very far. And when I was planning this conference, I remember that when I was at the university in 1996, 1997, I wanted to do a research regarding how political resistance and mostly armed struggle has been present in the whole history of the island. Sometimes we had been described as a very peaceful country, but I wanted to visualize that really we had been resistant for a long time. And now I was thinking that arts and culture has also been a key role in that resistance. And also we have been trying to deal with all the narratives that has been built in order to keep colonialism. Because when I start thinking about the relationship with arts and society, the key word that comes to my mind every time is colonialism, and the impact in all that context of economic situation, political situation, cultural situation. And the thing about guiding and influencing the narratives comes from hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, we remember the story of Taínos, like droning Diego Salcedo because they believed they were gods. And, you know, most of the evidence says that long before Diego Salcedo's drawing, they already know that they were not gods, you know, as close as 1493 in Dominican Republic, Taínos were already resisting and fighting Spanish. And we also get into the idea that our Taínos, that there was a one sector that were the Caribes, that were cannibals, and they eat people, they rape women. But most of the evidence says that there were not a different tribe named Caribes, and probably there was the people who were resisting, who were moving into the small islands in order to organize. And so we had been all the time resistant to the change of narratives to what is best for the political power of the moment. So in terms of arts, obviously the first years was mostly related in terms of religious, not just here, but in the rest of the world. I would highlight probably our most important painter of 18th century, Jose Campeche, which is his work is mostly related to religious and portraits, but also he grabbed and recorded some important moments, historical moments, as this painting, which is related to the invasion of 1797, which was a very important moment in terms of Puerto Rican identity, because that invasion was resisted by criollos, by locals, not the Spanish. If you had the military control of the island, I would say like you only had one job, you know, defend militarily the island. And at that moment, it were the criollos in Santurce, by the way, in Cangrejos. There was a lot of struggle in Caño Martín Peña, very close to here, Loíza, and the rest of Santurce. It was the criollos to resist the attack. So I would highlight Campeche in the context of that moment in 18th century. And obviously, we have in 19th century, Francisco Oller, which I will highlight the stage in his career that he was, his paintings were pretty much related to the abolition of slavery. It was a very important moment. This is one of the portraits. I believe this is the one that haven't been found yet. And there's also a couple of drawings related to the same movement of abolition of slavery. And I will do, because I'm a musician, I will do some interludes across the conference to make a shift to music. And this is the first one, when I would highlight how music was an important aspect of political resistance during slavery, and how music was a key way of addressing and planning all the conspiracies from the slaves to escape. And by the way, you know, the bomba, which is one of the conglomerates of rhythms that we have in the island, was also used to prepare for those scenarios. When people were thinking they were just celebrating and having fun, they really were planning some of the conspiracies. 1841, 1843, there's some key aspects where this is. So for the friends outside, I will show a little video so you can see the real context of what this music represents. And the batey, which is the organization in a circular way. You're not going to see it here. You're going to see just two drummers, but the dynamics of dancing, singing, and drumming, which was very important in all that generation until the abolition of slavery in 1873. So just a little bit, a trial of you're gonna see when you arrive to the island in March or April. So just make sure you find some example of batey. Going back to Oller, you know, his most important painting, El Velorio, which in some way still making the same critique of the multiple dimensions of society, how we address things. I think across all the presentation, I was thinking about how we deal with things as Latinos, as Caribeños, as Puerto Ricans. We're different. We have different traditions that we always had been analyzed in a context, external context different from us. So I'm also very critical about the critiques of what this represents, but we're still having to struggle with all the social class issues and aspects. So this painting is from 1893, and then 1898 you have the invasion of the United States in the context of the Hispanic American War. That's another key moment that some sector of the population thinks and keeps saying that there were not resistance during that moment. There's still small evidence that it was. One of the examples is the case of Jose Maldonado, Águila Blanca, that, by the way, one of our main artists and musicians, René Perez, is doing, I think it's still in the research stage of doing a movie regarding this figure, which is very interesting. And like 80 years after one of the main operations of the armed struggle organizations, Los Macheteros, that's the name they gave to their main action, which was a robbery of the Wells Fargo in 1983 in Hartford, Connecticut. That operation was called Águila Blanca, honoring this figure. The first years of the 20th century was years of a lot of oppression, a lot of influence of the United States, a lot of racism. You can find a lot of comics in different national papers. In that case, you will see Puerto Rico as part of a menu, specifically a pig in the menu. And you will see a lot of this in most of the US press, which in some way shows the real influence of the transition to the United States power. You will see other artists in Puerto Rico, such as Ramon Frade, which on the other side was trying to picture what's going on in the lives of the Puerto Rican, the rural life. And I will highlight the role about photography also in that context. I will try to explain a little bit later that when the Commonwealth was developed, one of the main strategies of the tourism company and the economic development company was trying to, how do you say, contrarrestar, to counteract all the images that were being shown around poverty, around the rural life, the peasants. And I will highlight, this is as an example. Jack Delamo is probably one of our greatest photographer. And one important project of his work was with the FSA, which is what it stands for, it was not food. I just forgot it was an agency related to agriculture, who starts sending has a project of documenting photography, the farm service agency. So it was a federal agency not related to arts and culture, that at the time was the main responsible of a big project of documenting all the agricultural life and highlighting how was the life in the rural areas of the island. So I want to highlight that photography is also a great way of understanding those times. 1903 was the foundation of the University of Puerto Rico, who was another important aspect of the development of the country. English was established as a first language at that time. That was a big struggle that we will see in all the 1930s generation, or mostly of writers and artists. And at the same time, I will highlight in my second music interlude that the beginning of the 20th century was also the development of another music gender, local music gender, which is La Plena, which start becoming a way of communicating and sharing stories, and kind of, some people have described it as a newspaper of of the people. So that became another way of resistance that will develop in the next few years until I would say 2023, which is still not just an element of celebration, but also as an element of protest and politics. Then you will see like the 1930s will be, and I will start jumping because of time, you will see a lot of time of struggles, poverty, resistance in terms of identity, Spanish, because of all the dynamics became again the main language. 1930s, you have a lot of struggle in terms of workers, the sugarcane strike, the organization of the Nationalist Party in 1930, I would say that there were some kind of turbulent times in terms of politics. Then you have the massacre of 1937. You have the figure of Pedro Albizu Campos leading the Nationalist Party and all the struggle related to pro-independence movements. And then you have a lot of things going on in Latin America with revolutions, with movements to socialism and communism. And then you have United Nations starting to put some pressure in terms of countries that have colonies. Remember the exact number, there's resolution 1514 15, which was approved finally in 1960, I think, start putting pressure on countries. So United States didn't want to be on the list of countries that have colonies. So at that time, there started a process of transition into a new political model, which still could be described as colonialism, but we are very creative. So we created a new way of framing this that some people even doesn't have a translation in English. We use the translation of Commonwealth in English, but in Spanish is Associate Free State, right? So that project was led by Luis Muñoz Marin, end up in 1952 or started, it was consolidated in 1952 and was very important because I would say that it was a trial. So it was a way of developing the political component with the Commonwealth, the economic component with the Operation Bootstrap, and also the cultural component with Operación Serenidad, which I will talk a little bit about that. So this is a very unique scenario because I remember discussions on United Nations, and one of the main critiques to the development of the United Nations is that they didn't put efforts in developing the cultural component. You remember, UN started with the Euro and the political integration, and that's why it has failed a lot. Here, they started with the cultural component even early, even before the Commonwealth, with a project that I will describe. The Operation Bootstrap was a very interesting project of industrialization, and the idea was moving Puerto Rico's economy forward by focusing on foreign direct investment, which is kind of the most proven economic strategy for countries. You bring new money with new enterprises, new companies, especially manufacturing, and you will increase the quality of life in a country. So that was Operation Bootstrap. US firms that located in the island and kept the money in Puerto Rican banks to be reinvested, they will not pay federal taxes. So that started maybe in the 40s and was the basis of the Operation Bootstrap. And the Commonwealth, which is kind of, I describe it as a magic trick when you have a colony one day, and then after July 25th, 1952, the colony disappeared and it creates the Commonwealth with a local constitution and with some political rights that throughout the years has been proven that it doesn't exist. And I will talk to the cultural component, but also it was a way of showing the rest of the world a model of a Latin American country that could experience economic development without having to go into the road of communism, right? So it was there is a word referring in Spanish that I don't know the word, which is vitrina, like it's kind of a showcase for the rest of the world. So the investment of the United States in the political and economic project of the island has also a geopolitical role in terms of the rest of Latin America, who were struggling a lot in those years. And also, it has a thing about a storytelling regarding the island, the tourism strategy that started in the 1950s. So I will share some couple of minutes of a very nice video from the 1950s, which is called Fiesta Island. You can find the 15-minute documentary on YouTube, where they show this new phase of the island. Those who has been here, the locals who have been in the middle of the discussions regarding tourism and the locals versus tourists, will find here some images that's still very relevant today. So I will just show a couple of minutes so you can see the new face of the island that was starting to be shown on the 1950s. I edit the video just to show some clips. So
this is the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, a land of song and laughter. Tiny bit of the United States to the warm seas of the Atlantic.
Javier, can you turn the sound up just a little? We're struggling to hear that.
The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico waves proudly beside old glory.
I will do it now. Let me check on the.
Thank you.
Puerto Rico's world famous Operation Pratt ceremony, marking the island's new status as a Commonwealth with its own constitution. Heroes of Korea, among the 5,000 Puerto Rican troops who served valiantly with the United Nations forces. The self-government was approved by the U.S. Parliament and union-wide consent with the United States was overwhelmingly voted by Puerto Rico. American today, Puerto Rico is coming to the window of real democracy. San Juan's Club joined these roads to symbolize Puerto Rico's progress.
Images speak louder than words in this instance.
They call this San Juan's Gold Coast, the center of its resort hotels, casinos, and nightlife. Here is the Condado Beach Hotel with its private oceanfront beach club. It's a vacation paradise 12 months of the year. Taking the view, a gem in the tropics. Fabulous Marina Hills Hotel. The approaches are modern. Every room is air conditioned. Here truly is living fit for a king. A hotel bathed in sunshine and splendor, with its private bathing lagoon, swimming pool, and elaborate recreational facilities. My, oh my, the old swimming hole never had anything on this. Tropical drinks too. This is really lit.
Well, so you have an idea of how at that time the whole tourism strategy for the first time started in the 50s. Also, the 50s was very important because it was the development of the cultural institutions. 1956, I think, was the 1957, the creation of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, with its kind of the Ministry of Culture, the equivalent of the Ministry of Culture. You also have the development of the symphony orchestra, the Conservatory of Music, the public television program. Interestingly, the symphony orchestra and the festival, the Casals Festival, and then the Conservatory of Music were developed by the Economic Development Agency. So at that time, it was seen as a strategy of economic development to bring tourists, to show that, you know, foreign direct investment has always been related to like, let's go 10 years before that. One of the most important projects of educational and cultural projects of the island was developed, which is called DIVETCO, División de Educación para la Comunidad, as part of the educational project. And the idea, and this is kind of the flagship of Operación Serenidad. This was the project that the government developed. It was very related to the New Deal and all the strategies that Roosevelt, after the Great Depression, they developed to stimulate the economy. You have the WPA in the United States, where you have a lot of artists getting salaries, getting opportunities of work, because this will drive the economy. The more money you put on the economy, the best it would be to get out of the recession. So this project has a lot of influence. A lot of artists were hired to work in this project with the purpose of generating a lot of educational content, movies, videos, books. So you will have, like, at the time, maybe some people estimate the production in over 100 books, like 40 movies, and a lot of educational material for the communities, especially for the educational communities. So the thing of seal screening, all art manifestations that were pretty much developed at that time. And you will find probably the most important generation of artists from the 50s working on this project. So there's been a lot of research that I invite you to analyze regarding the production of DIVETCO. I think we have to do a lot of research in terms of how the influence of work, of having direct salaries for covering, you know, as your main job, help these artists develop and thrive. And one of the critiques of this project has been always that how this became in some way a symbolic way of sustaining the colony through the cultural component that I just mentioned with Operación Serenidad. And I think one of the key figures that address this issue is René Marquez, which is probably one of our most important writers. And René Marquez has always explained, there's a lot of letters. Catherine March has a great book, it's called Negociaciones Culturales, that she shared even some conversations through letters between him and Antonio Colorado, who used to criticize René Marquez because he was very independent. He's still making some critics to the government. He was saying, hey, you work here, why you're criticizing your boss in terms of work. But he appeals to the idea that he could be an intellectual, and on the other side, he could be a man of action in terms of doing specific projects to the government, and he doesn't saw any kind of contradiction with that. So that's a very interesting scenario, and some people have always questioned, you know, do working for this project affect your intellectual freedom, your creative freedom, and your artistic freedom? I would say that the answer is no, but there's still a lot of discussion regarding this. You will find a lot of great films that at the time highlight some important historical aspects. I will recommend this too. And by the way, I will do one more interlude in music to show you one clip from one of those movies that presents the dynamic of La Plena, which I mentioned before, the idea of listening to the news and writing a song regarding this thing that happened around. So this is part of the film La Plena that you will find full in YouTube.
Que sea conmigo americano, ya tenía su espina dorsal, que parecía un barquito cantando. Que sea conmigo americano. Como de la escuela, seguro, de lo que tú eras, que sea conmigo americano.
You can keep watching the video later. And most of that dynamic, you know, of the corner, the street, the representation of the local communities has been very present. One nice intersection between visual arts and music is this collection that was developed by a couple of the most important artists of that generation. This is precisely the song that we were listening. Some of them was done by Lorenzo Mar, the other part was done by Tufino and others. So you can see the mix between plena and the contemporary topics of that generation, things about hurricanes, smuggling through the boats in Cataño, all the dynamics of violence related to the communities. And by the way, there's one masterpiece by Tufino, which is La Plena, that summarizes most of all of the most important. You will have the opportunity of looking at this. So I highlight these two artists because they were really, really important in terms of the most recent and contemporary generations. Another link between other components of society was that economic development agency, the same that I mentioned that they just created the symphony orchestra and the Festival Casals. They also had a very interesting program of murals in ¿cómo se dice fábrica, Dios mío? The factories from the program of Operation Bootstrap. You will still have Rafael Rios, Tufino, Torre Martino. They all participate in that mural programs. And I highlight this because sometimes when we talk about cultural policy, we expect only the cultural components to address the issue of culture. And it's not true. The most important cultural projects in the island, some of them has been developed by tourism company, educational department, economic development components. So they are accountable for cultural development. So you as artists have to understand that we have to advocate for new resources, not just from the cultural component, but also as it happens. So there's good or interesting lessons and positive lessons from that period of the 1940s and 50s. In the 1950s, you start the development of museums in the island, especially the Museum of the University of Puerto Rico, Museo Arte de Ponce, which I will highlight later, that was founded, by whom became the governor in 1968. And then you have the Taller de Arte Gráfica in 1957, who served as an educational project, probably the most important in a lot of years in the island, and was the basis for a whole new generation of artists that you should look up. Then you have the 70s, which 70s was a decade of a lot of political struggle. And arts was there to respond and to serve as a resource. You have a lot of things related to the environmental aspect. You have the thing about the fight against mining in the center of the island. You start seeing the development of movements against the war in Vietnam. The thing about the beaches, that poster seems to be recent, but not. It's from the 70s. We're still fighting for public access to beaches in an island, which seems incredible. And you see the development of artist workshops that start providing support for the social action and movements. There is a nice chapter by Diane Brass related to the Taller Seco, Taller Bija, and all the things, the connection that were happening at the time in terms of social movements. I would highlight this one from Rafael Rivera Rosa because it was related to the armed struggle movement at the end of the 60s with the Comandos Armados de Liberación. In the 1968, between 1968 and 1972, this clandestine group did a lot of actions, symbolic actions, by the way, to impact the economic power of multinational companies in the island. So if you look for history, you will find a lot of bombings in Condado, in hotels. Remember, there was an action in Miss USA event in Cerro Mar. And this is an example of how artists support these actions with their art. At the time, I will say it later, but in some contexts, they were very independent from the formal political structures. In other contexts, as in music, as I will mention, even some of the political parties start incorporating cultural projects in their lines. So this is a short example of this figure who used to lead, and we were talking yesterday that there is a little bit of performance involved, because this clandestine leader create this character, which was called Alfonso Beal, and the name of the last name is the initials of two of our main patriots, B de Betances and A de Albizu. So this person appears during all the 4 years, suddenly they disappear.
Javier, we seem to have lost you.
1972, casually the time that the pro-independence solved story in a couple of, but while I was, okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, has to be the internet. I was thinking that while in the case of visual arts, the workshops were very independent, in the case of music, some political movements were, they incorporated all the cultural management aspects inside the structure. It's very interesting to highlight that the Socialist Party in the 70s used to have a record label, which was Disco Libre, and they generated most of the musical production of the protest song in the 70s, especially by the Grupo Taoné, that all of them became, great singer-songwriters and artists. I have to say that they are kind of the Bob Dylan and the Joan Baez of
I think the internet just dipped out again.
of Puerto Rico at the time. So, and yes, my internet here is yo creo que no.
You're back.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think I'm on the Wi-Fi. I thought I was on the cable, but it seems that I am it has to be the Wi-Fi. So every time you lost me, just let me know and I will wait a couple of seconds until it go back.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that very interesting, this figure, clandestine figure from the 70s, was actually the leader of the political movement. So while he was leading the political movement, he was also leading the clandestine and the armed struggle efforts. So it wasn't revealed until his death in 2010. So I think this was a very beautiful scenario of how these patriots address the fight against colonialism from all the possible fronts that they can. While this was happening here, let's not forget that this is a country that we have half of the people here and half of the people outside in our other municipalities as New York, Connecticut, Boston, Philadelphia, now Florida, right? Now, I think that we're still in the 5.1 citizens in the States and 3.3 in the island. And most of those artists were also having some presence. Tufino have some roles with Marco Dimas, with Carlos Osorio in the creation of Taller Boricua in Nueva York. Also the development of Museo del Barrio. So there was a lot of things going on in New York that we have to analyze because of the great diaspora that's been developed in the last 100 years, I said, since the beginning of 20th century. In like 3 or 4 different stages. The 40s was a very important one, and those people who were moving and were born in the States in the 40s and the 50s, those were the ones that in the 60s and 70s started having an important role in the States. And I cannot put aside, which is kind of another music interlude, the role of Latin music in New York. So at the same time, which is normally not related to this aspect of resistance, Latin communities, especially Puerto Rican communities in the United States, were starting to show off other ways of demonstrating that identity. especially in El Barrio, in East Harlem, Lower East Side, Brooklyn. There's a lot of great communities. And then there were some aesthetics of the gang approach. You know, you have the Young Lords, which is a very interesting case to analyze as a civil society organization that turn in, or a gang that turns into a human rights and civic organization in some way. But then you start having all the scenario of salsa, for example, that were trying to address issues of racism, marginalization, and all the aspect related. You will see in a lot of the covers, you know, that show off force, the idea of how do Latinos have to survive in such a difficult scenario of New York, of the city of New York. But going back to the island, we still in the same scenario of colonialism. At the end of the 70s, I would say that it was the most difficult moments. I would highlight the murder of pro-independence activists, especially by setting up them and murdering some young people. By the way, I put the cover of the newspaper because they were described as terrorists. They were, by the way, there is a video that got lost from the TV to the public TV channel where the governor of the time was celebrating the murder of these two terrorists. And I think this was the most important moment at the time. And I would take the time so you can visualize what happened at that context. With this video that was done like 40 years after by one emerging artist. So I will take the time, I'm still okay with time. So I will show you this 3-minute video that shows what happened that 25th of July of 1978, which is very interesting because July 25, all the sectors of the population commemorates that day. You have the people who celebrates the colony, celebrating the day that the Constitution was signed, July 25. You have the pro-statehood people celebrating July 25 because that's the day of the invasion. And then you have pro-independent movements commemorating the murder of these two. So that's why July 25 is it's kind of an example of how complex is the political dynamics of the island. So I will put this video so you can see what happened that day in Cerro Maravilla. So interesting connection. One of the kids were the son of Pedro Juan Soto, which was one of the main writers from the Libetco program and one of the main contemporary writers. So that moment was very critical in terms of the political situation at the end of the 70s. I think it helped dismantling all the pro-independence movement, which from that time after were never the same. The undercover agent was murdered a couple of years ago. No one never knows if it was the police, if it was the left. There was a lot of, the conspiracy was discovered. I was remembering that I had the opportunity of meeting the guy that was driving the taxi. And it was the taxi driver that at some point says, there was not one shooting, there were two shootings that they realized that they were murdered. The first story was that they got into shooting and they were killed during the shooting, but thanks to the taxi driver that declares that there were two shootings, they realized that there were murder on purpose after that, after being set up by the police. In 2 years after, the same governor that was at the time won the elections. There is a lot of visual content from that campaign of Gobierno Araña. Comité Pro Defensa de la Cultura Puertorriqueña was the name of an organization at the time. And by 1978, the same government of Romero, which won the elections of 1980 in a very interesting way, he was losing the elections, and there was a blackout on the place that were counting votes. When the lights came back, he was winning the election. So you can figure out what happened. But those years was a lot of visual activism at that time. So 80s, 90s, at some point in the 90s, there was a lot of economic development in the island, but still it was pretty much related to the same economic strategy from Operation Bootstrap. The change was like in the United Revenue Service Code, the IRS code, there was a section which is 936 that pretty much does the same, allows tax exemptions for companies who establish in the island. So most of the economic model at the time in the 90s and the booming of the economy was based on that economic strategy. What happened was that after 2000, at the end of the 90s and 2000s, globalization started like in an exponent, growing in an exponential way. So the benefits of having a US territory doesn't make sense anymore because you have the option of having trade agreements with any country that makes the same guarantees of having the US territory. And also because of the political pressure of pro-statehood sector, which believes that if we were treated different than the states, we will never become a state. They advocate to eliminate the section, the 936 section. And it was a transition period of 10 years that started in 1996 until 2006. So you will see that the big economic crisis of the island really started in 2006 when the tax benefits ended. So a lot of companies start transitioning, some of the patents start ending, and they start to move to other places that were more cheaper than Puerto Rico. Because remember that we have the same minimum wage as in the States, although our GDP is per capita is half of the lowest GDP per capita in the States, which is Mississippi. I will take this opportunity to share one example of the fail of the Commonwealth. Before 1952, the GDP per capita of the island was half of the GDP per capita of Mississippi. So there is some, I think it's in the Harvard conferences from Luis Muñoz Marín, that with the new economic and political model, they will increase the GDP per capita, and it would be like 3/4 of the Mississippi in 1970s, and by 1980, I think he mentioned, I don't remember the exact date, we will equal the GDP of the states. So it's been 70 years, and we still have the half of the GDP per capita of Mississippi. So that's another example of how we came to here with a failed economic model. So in the 90s, and so again, the booming of the 2006 started the economic crisis. I will go back there. But then in the last 10 years, you also have another movement of using art to go into underdeveloped spaces, area. There is a great example here at Santurce that you will see all the booming of public art, all the events related to rescuing spaces for artist-run spaces. But at the same time, the regeneration, the urban generation that it takes, you can have the example of Calle Serra, who used to be the main cluster of music sector in the 70s. All the recording companies or the artists, they have offices there in the same street. You will see like Fania, Sony, you will see like the offices of Willy Rosario in front of Tommy Olivencia, Bobby Valentin, Bronco Records, Coco Records. There was a hub of music very close to the Conservatory of Music, by the way. In 2000, it became another cluster of, but at this time of artist-run spaces, which is a very interesting scenario. But at the same time, that has changed a lot in recent years because of gentrification, which is another topic I will not address right now, but it's very important to understand. I said a couple of years ago a phrase that was, maybe it's too hard, but right now, but it's very important. Artists are agents of gentrification. It's, you cannot say it in a different way. It will happen anyway. But at the same time, how do you address that in order to make sure that displacement is not the result of your actions? There has to be some strategies related to real estate that we have to think, and how to gain, capital to have access to the real estate, which is the real question. So now you will see the same conversations again of gentrification, of people buying lands. Those same streets that I mentioned, it's owned by foreign investors. All the Serra Street now, basically, it's going to be very difficult to find places known by local. But going back to the positive side, you have seen a lot of booming of artist-run spaces, self-managed spaces that I think it's very important to understand and to support. So when the students from Pratt comes, it would be very interesting to visit some of those spaces. But in recent years, as I mentioned, the economic component and the crisis, the appointment of a fiscal board, that I have to say, if all the progressive and liberal movements and political movements use art, the status quo also use art, and artists were very important in the advocacy for a fiscal board that now controls most of the budget and the economic decisions in the island. The bankruptcy was stated in 2015, so that was a great social, economic, and political challenge. You have the demographic a challenge of a population that is reducing since when? 2006, the same year of the economic crisis, the beginning of the economic crisis. The population is going down. That's a challenge for businesses, for economic development. Then you have Hurricane Maria in 2017, which, more than a natural disaster, is a way of showing off all the political, economic, and social disaster. We have a scenario that we couldn't anticipate before. At the time, we had the context of President Trump, which increased the tensions of how to address an issue like this. But in the other side, culture became a way of responding in terms of the community aspect. There was a lot of programs and a lot of coordinated efforts to support the communities, and also as a way of protest and showing off the challenges that the island experiment with the failure of the government. And yesterday we were talking about the importance of cultural spaces as places of resilience and community recovery. This was the scenario. 2019, we have the political crisis that end up with the resignation of the governor, and artists play also an important role in that process. I can say that now you have a great generation of artists that are moving forward projects. I will go straight to my final thoughts, and I will highlight three things that I think are going to be very important for the future, so we can have some time to talk. I have shown some different ways of developing cultural policy. We're still missing comprehensive cultural policies that integrates all the aspects that has worked at some time. There is no link between educational policy and cultural policy. There are no links between tourism policy and cultural policy. There are no links between economic development and cultural policy. There are no links between anything. So you as artists, especially those who are here, I think there's something there we have to address, but to educate I don't think that people in those spaces understand the roles of arts and culture in social development, in economic development, in educational development, in the tourism strategy to be a more real and honest tourism strategy. I think there is an issue of sustainability. I am as someone with a background in business, I really believe in the role of artists as work, and we have to understand the role of artistic work and trying to keep finding more ways of sustainability. And while doing this, the challenge of, we as artists have always to be responding to the situation, to the context. Is that what we want to do all the time? It's okay to see arts as a political resource, as a social resource, but do we have all the time to create and to think about the instrumentality of arts and culture? Because I believe a lot of it arts for the art's sake. You don't have to be, now artists have all the pressure. Every time there's a single issue with government, people are asking, where are the artists? As it is our responsibility. And how do we become part of the game? Because all the dynamics in the politics of the states is always influenced. And I will mention one example, which is Hurricane Maria narrative. We have been 5 years. I know there's a lot of healing to be done in terms of what we lived in 2017, but at the same time, this is a political agenda. At the same time, you have a President Trump trying to come back. You have the Democrats trying to find out every narrative they can in order to address that. And suddenly we are in the middle of that. And the philanthropic sector will move things with political interest. The government will do that. And one of my concern is, when do we put a stop on that? And we make some reflection. Are we creating from artistic freedom, or we are going to be always responding? I don't have an answer, but it's a concern that I have after doing all this presentation and the role of arts in resistance, because you get tired of resisting all the time. So, and finally, we need to show more the multiple values of artwork in order to identify other ways of support. So it seems it could be very contradictory what I'm saying, because I don't want arts to have the responsibility of moving the whole country forward, but at the same time, it is what is happening right now. So we need to find new ways of supporting that. So I will stop there, and I will love some comments from Maite, which is our visual arts leader. I'm not. And then we can open up for questions, discussion, and ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was great.